Life is a journey full of twists and turns, and sometimes, it takes us to places we never expected. For Richard Thompson, the twists had been plenty, but it was the turns that left him gasping for hope. At the age of 65, Richard felt like his life was over. The years had flown by, and in their wake, they had left behind a man who felt tired, defeated, and unsure of his place in the world. He had spent most of his adult life working as an accountant in a mid-sized firm, dedicating his days to numbers, spreadsheets, and the pursuit of financial stability. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was safe, and Richard liked safe. Or at least, he thought he did. Then came the day that everything changed. The company where he had worked for over 40 years decided it was time for a fresh start. And Richard found himself being handed a retirement package and a polite farewell. Just like that, his daily routine was gone. The office chatter, the deadlines, the purpose, gone. For a while, he tried to convince himself that this was a good thing. After all, wasn't retirement supposed to be the golden era of life? Time to relax, travel, enjoy hobbies? But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Richard felt an emptiness he couldn't ignore. His wife, Emily, tried to cheer him up, suggesting gardening projects, small trips, and even learning to cook together. But Richard felt restless, like a ship without a rudder, drifting aimlessly on the vast ocean of life. It wasn't that he didn't appreciate Emily's efforts. He loved her deeply and admired her resilience. But inside, he felt a gnawing sense of regret for the things he hadn't done, the dreams he had shelved in the name of practicality, and the passions he had never pursued. One evening, as he sat alone in the small study that had once been his sanctuary, Richard opened an old notebook he hadn't seen in years. It was filled with sketches, rough drawings of inventions he had once dreamed of creating, ideas for gadgets that could make life easier. He remembered the excitement he had felt back then, the fire that burned in his heart as he scribbled ideas late into the night. But life had a way of steering him towards safer shores. Responsibilities piled up, bills needed to be paid, and soon enough, his dreams were buried under the weight of daily life. As he flipped through the pages, Richard felt something stir inside him. Could it be possible to start again at his age? The thought seemed ridiculous. After all, wasn't he too old to chase dreams? But then, a memory surfaced, a conversation he had once had with his father, who had told him, "It's never too late to start again, Richard. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the notebook, the ideas that once fueled his imagination, and the possibility, however slim, that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to make a difference. The next morning, over breakfast, he looked at Emily and said, "I think I want to try something new." She smiled gently, her eyes crinkling with warmth. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to build something," he replied. "Something useful. Something that could help people." Emily didn't laugh or dismiss his idea. Instead, she nodded and said, "Then let's figure out how to do that." It wasn't easy. Richard didn't have the same energy he once had, and the technology world had evolved far beyond what he remembered. But he was determined. He started small, watching videos on YouTube, reading articles, and reaching out to people who could guide him. He joined an online forum for inventors and tinkerers, where he found a community of people who shared his passion. Slowly, the ideas in his notebook began to take shape. He built prototypes in his garage, sometimes failing spectacularly, but always learning. The failures didn't deter him, they fueled him. Each setback was a lesson, and each small success was a victory worth celebrating. Emily became his biggest supporter, helping him test his designs, offering suggestions, and even bringing him cups of tea during long hours in the garage. One day, after months of trial and error, Richard finally built something that worked, a simple device designed to help elderly people open jars with ease. It wasn't a revolutionary invention, but it was practical, and Richard knew it could make a difference in people's lives. With Emily's encouragement, he applied for a patent, and to his amazement, it was approved. That little device marked the beginning of a new chapter. Richard started attending local fairs and markets, showcasing his invention. He met other inventors, shared stories, and learned from their experiences. Soon, he was invited to speak at a community center about his journey, and the room was packed with people eager to hear from the man who had dared to start again at 65. As he stood in front of the audience, Richard felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He spoke about his struggles, his doubts, and the power of persistence. He told them it wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And most importantly, he told them that it was never too late to start again. After the talk, a young man approached him and said, "I've been thinking about starting my own business, but I've been afraid to take the leap. Hearing your story gives me hope." Richard smiled and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Go for it," he said. "Don't wait for the perfect moment. It may never come. The best time to start is now." That evening, as he sat with Emily on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Richard felt at peace. He wasn't the same man he had been when he left the accounting firm. He had rediscovered a part of himself that had been buried for too long, and he knew he had more to give. He realized that age wasn't a barrier. It was a badge of honor, a testament to the experiences he had gathered and the wisdom he could share. His journey had just begun, and he was ready for whatever came next. Over the next few months, Richard's invention gained attention. A small local company reached out, offering to help him produce it on a larger scale. The idea of mass production was daunting, but Richard embraced the challenge. He spent hours in meetings, learning about manufacturing processes, packaging, and marketing. It was a steep learning curve, but he was determined to see it through. Emily stood by him every step of the way, offering support, encouragement, and the occasional gentle nudge when he doubted himself. Together, they navigated the ups and downs of entrepreneurship. There were moments when Richard wanted to quit, when the weight of it all felt too heavy. But then he would think of the people his invention could help, the seniors struggling to open jars, the caregivers looking for ways to make daily tasks easier, and he would push on. Richard also began mentoring others in the community, sharing his story and encouraging them to pursue their own dreams. He found joy in helping others, in seeing their eyes light up with the realization that they, too, could start again. He often told them, "It's never too late to learn, to grow, and to create something meaningful. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, tell you otherwise." As the years passed, Richard's small invention turned into a thriving business, employing a handful of people from his community. It wasn't about the money, it was about the impact, the purpose, and the sense of fulfillment that came from knowing he was making a difference. Richard and Emily traveled to different towns, attending fairs and expos, meeting people whose lives had been touched by the simple device he had created. The gratitude they expressed was overwhelming, and it fueled Richard's desire to keep going. He continued to innovate, coming up with new ideas and exploring ways to improve everyday life. His mind, once dulled by routine, was now alive with possibilities. Every challenge became an opportunity, and every obstacle a chance to learn and grow. Richard knew he wasn't the same man who had once felt lost and defeated. He had found his spark again, and it had reignited a sense of purpose that had been dormant for too long. The road hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. He often thought about the day he opened that old notebook, and how that simple act had set him on a path he never expected. It had reminded him that dreams don't expire, they wait patiently, ready to bloom when we find the courage to nurture them. And Richard had found that courage, not despite his age, but because of it. His journey was far from over, and he was ready to embrace whatever came next. After all, it's never too late to start again. Richard's days began earlier now, not because he had to punch a clock, but because he couldn't wait to get to work. His small workshop, once a dusty storage space in the corner of the garage, had blossomed into a bustling hub of creativity. Shelves lined with tools, prototypes, and sketches surrounded him like old friends, each item a testament to his journey. The sound of gears whirring, metal clinking, and the occasional crackle of solder filled the space with a rhythm that was music to his ears. Emily often watched him from the doorway, a soft smile playing on her lips as she saw the man she loved so deeply transform before her eyes. She would bring him tea, sometimes lunch, and remind him gently not to skip meals in his excitement. Richard's inventions had grown in scope. What began as a simple jar opener had blossomed into a series of assistive devices designed to make daily life easier for seniors and people with limited mobility. His most recent project was a lightweight, foldable walking aid that adjusted automatically to a person's height. The design was simple yet innovative, and he felt a rush of excitement every time he tested a new iteration. As the business expanded, Richard hired a small team of passionate individuals. Some were young, fresh out of school, eager to learn, while others were retirees like him who wanted to stay active and contribute their skills. The workshop buzzed with ideas, laughter, and a sense of purpose that made every day feel like a gift. Richard made it a point to know every member of his team personally. He listened to their ideas, encouraged their creativity, and reminded them often that they were building more than products, they were building solutions that mattered. Emily, too, became an integral part of the team, managing the growing demands of orders, customer inquiries, and outreach. Together, they were unstoppable. One afternoon, as Richard sat in his workshop sketching ideas for a new project, a tool to help people with arthritis tie their shoelaces, he received an email that made his heart skip a beat. It was an invitation to speak at a national conference for senior entrepreneurs. The thought of standing on a stage, sharing his story with hundreds of people, was both thrilling and terrifying. But Emily squeezed his hand and said, "This is your chance to inspire even more people. You've come so far, Richard. You have a message worth sharing." So, with a mixture of nerves and excitement, Richard accepted the invitation. The weeks leading up to the event were a blur of preparation. He practiced his speech in front of Emily, their dog Max wagging his tail as an enthusiastic, if somewhat distracted, audience member. Richard refined his story, focusing not just on the successes but also on the failures, the doubts, and the moments he had almost given up. He wanted to be honest, to show that the path wasn't easy but that it was possible. The day of the conference arrived, and Richard stood backstage, heart pounding, as the host introduced him to the audience. As he walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinded him, but the sound of applause filled him with warmth. He took a deep breath, looked out at the sea of faces, and began to speak. He talked about the day he lost his job, the despair he felt, and the spark that reignited when he opened his old notebook. He shared stories of late nights in the garage, of prototypes that didn't work, of the support Emily had given him, and of the small victories that kept him going. He spoke about the importance of believing in oneself, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise, and how age is not a limitation but an advantage. The audience was rapt, hanging on to his every word. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, and Richard felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. People lined up to shake his hand, thank him, and tell him how much his story had inspired them. One woman, in her 70s, said, "I've always wanted to write a book, but I thought I was too old. After hearing you speak, I'm going to start writing tomorrow." Richard's heart swelled. That evening, as he and Emily sat quietly in their hotel room, he turned to her and said, "Can you believe this is happening? Me, an old accountant, standing on a stage, inspiring people." Emily leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I've always believed in you, Richard. Always." The next few months were a whirlwind. Richard's business grew, and with it came new challenges. Managing orders, ensuring quality, and keeping up with demands sometimes felt overwhelming. But Richard learned to delegate, to trust his team, and to focus on what mattered most, creating products that helped people. He received letters from customers who shared how his inventions had changed their lives. A woman who could now cook for herself again, a man who could tie his shoes without help, a grandmother who could open jars for her grandchildren. Each story fueled Richard's determination to keep going. He also started a mentorship program for seniors interested in entrepreneurship, offering workshops and one-on-one guidance. He believed deeply in paying it forward, in helping others discover that it truly was never too late to start again. Richard's health remained a priority. He and Emily walked together every morning, savoring the quiet moments before the day's demands took over. They cooked healthy meals, laughed often, and made time for the simple joys that made life beautiful. As the years passed, Richard continued to innovate, to dream, and to build. His workshop became a symbol of possibility, a reminder that creativity doesn't fade with age, it transforms, deepens, and flourishes when nurtured. On his 75th birthday, his team surprised him with a celebration at the workshop. The walls were adorned with photos capturing moments from his journey, Richard standing proudly with his first prototype, holding his patent certificate, speaking at the conference, and surrounded by his team. There was a large cake with, "It's never too late to start again," written in icing, and a banner that read, "Happy 75th, Richard! Here's to many more inventions." Richard stood before them, overwhelmed by gratitude. He looked around at the faces, young, old, and everything in between, and felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He raised a glass and said, "Thank you, all of you. This isn't just my story, it's ours. Each of you has contributed to this journey, and I'm so grateful. Remember, no matter your age, your past, or your doubts, it's never too late to start again. Keep dreaming, keep building, and never stop believing in the power of a new beginning." As the room erupted in cheers, Richard knew he had found his true calling. He wasn't just an inventor. He was a believer in second chances, a champion of hope, and a living testament to the idea that life's greatest chapters often begin when we least expect them. His story continued to unfold, each day a new page in the book he was writing with his life. And as long as he had breath in his lungs and ideas in his heart, he would keep going, keep creating, and keep proving that it's never too late to start again.